KNON 89.3 FM in Dallas and Fort Worth, the voice of the people.
Business owners, tell KNON's listeners about your business. You can put your business or event on KNON. KNON currently has space available to run announcements for you. Tell KNON's listeners about your goods, services, nightclub, concert, or event. Help keep the voice of the people on the air while putting your information on the air. KNON's been named the #1 radio station in Dallas by both the Dallas Observer and D Magazine. Put your business with Dallas's #1 station. Call now for more information at 214-828-9500, extension 227, or extension 233. For more information, go to KNON.org and click on the Run Spots on KNON page. It's a great way for your business to support community radio while letting more people know about you.
All right, folks, we have just received our special phone call from author and lecturer Candy Leonard, author of Beatleness. And we are wanting to ask her a few questions about her experiences with the Beatles and Beatleness and the effect of the Beatles on our generation and subsequent generations. Okay. So, Candy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. And
I also hear an echo, but I don't know if that's on my end or yours, but we'll try to work with that.
Oh, okay. All right. Are you on a landline or
I am.
Okay, that is great. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for calling, and thank you for this copy of the book. It is extremely interesting, and boy, does it draw you in. And I just want to announce to the audience that Candy is a sociologist, a lecturer with a background in qualitative research, child development, popular culture, and media studies, and boy, based on the insights that I saw in the book, much, much more. So thank you so much, Candy, for calling.
Well, thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, wonderful. Well, let me just start out asking you, tell us about your personal experience seeing the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show.
Well, like so many of our generation, I mean, I remember that night in vivid detail. It was a very special moment, and I was only 7.5 years old. But I had the sense even then, I don't know why exactly, but I had this feeling that I was witnessing something extraordinary. I mean, in the days and weeks that followed, especially, where everybody was just talking Beatles, Beatles, Beatles. Not only the young people, but everybody, right? The grown-ups, your aunts and uncles, your teachers, Walter Cronkite, Johnny Carson, everybody's Beatles, Beatles, Beatles. And it was a thing for young people. I think I sensed that at the time. One thing that happened that I remember that was really, it's funny. I find it funny now when I look back on it. Is that in April I was in second grade, and we had to do current events homework every week. We'd have to find an interesting article and come in and talk about it and all that. So I brought in this article that was a little picture of the Beatles getting haircuts on the set of A Hard Day's Night with a caption in it. And so I bring this in, and my teacher tells me, "You have to redo this assignment. This is not newsworthy." And I'm thinking to myself, is she kidding? How can she say this? This is all anybody's talking about. And so it just felt like something very special to me. And throughout my life, I knew I'd write about them someday. I didn't know exactly when, where, how, or what the, angle would be, whatever. But I knew I was going to write about them someday.
Yeah, well, yeah, that is, and that's pretty much my experience. I was just overwhelmed at seeing them. There was a little bit of build-up before that. And, when I heard them do From Me to You, I thought, that can't be their song. I've heard that before. But what it was is, I think it was the summer or spring of '63. That tune made it here to the airwaves in the U.S., and I'd forgotten the name of the group that did that. But
yeah, there were a couple of early releases that didn't really go anywhere.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
So can I ask how old you are?
I am 65. So I was 14 when I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
But isn't this interesting? Like, I was 7.5. You were 14. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference, right? At that age. I mean, a 7-year-old is not like a 14-year-old. You were twice my age, right?
Yeah.
You were post-puberty. I was a little kid, right? But yet, we were both smitten by them.
Yes, very much drawn in.
And that's the amazing thing, and that's why they are the unifier of the baby boom generation. Because, people talk about the baby boomers, which, the demographers define as anybody born between 1946 and 1964, because there was literally a boom in births during that period, right?
Right.
But that's a very wide age range, if you think about it. But yet, the thing that unifies everybody across that age range, well, I would cut it off at around 61, because the younger ones really don't necessarily remember it as well. But they were really the unifier for our generation in a way that nothing else could have been or ever was before.
Yeah, absolutely.
For any one group of people.
The world has not seen anything since this craze, before or after. It was just incredible. And I remember just my personal experience. I was 14 at the time, and a couple of buddies of mine, we were in 9th grade, and we went down to Dallas Love Field on November 22nd, 1963, and we saw the president and Jackie get off the plane. I'll tell you, people were chattering before the plane landed and everything. But I'll tell you, when the door opened to that plane and they walked out on those rolling stairs, there was the crowd, and there were about 2,000 people just on the tarmac at Love Field, not to mention all the crowds that were, farther in Dallas and that saw them along all the streets. But when they came out, there was just all of a sudden a hush in the crowd, and the hush probably lasted a second and a half, but it felt much longer. And you could actually feel this wave, a physical wave of awe, just flowing through that crowd. And then everyone erupted into applause and everything. And it was so wonderful. And I remember that feeling. And when the Beatles came on, Ed Sullivan, I had that very same feeling. Maybe it was the crowd in the studio audience that night. I don't know, but I felt that same physical wave of awe.
Something joyful. There was something, obviously if you were at that event, you must have, whoever took you, you were with your friends, whatever, you were, you were a Kennedy supporter, whatever. He interested you as a political, historical figure.
Absolutely.
And you witnessed that, and it was joyful and thrilling. And so, the Beatles were also political, charismatic figures in their own way.
Definitely. Oh, my gosh, yes. And it was great. Both of those moments. Later on in the day, not so great, but...
Can I ask how close you were to the where you were standing? You were actually in Dealey Plaza?
No, not at Dealey Plaza. I was at Dallas Love Field.
I thought you were okay, so you weren't at the other...
No. My buddies and I just took the bus to Love Field, and we walked there, and then we kind of walked to a spot where... one of their grandmothers were going to pick us up after the event, but at Love Field.
Nice. Well, it's nice that you had that experience.
Oh,
That's
my
great.
gosh. It's a moment you never forget. And
But,
and it was so great. I just felt like, and then there was such, if you remember, everyone in the United States and probably most parts of the world, there was just, for those few months, there was just a feeling of depression and after Kennedy's death, and it was just so dark. And then all of a sudden, these 4 kids from Liverpool come, and there were just smiles everywhere. The kids.
Yeah, they cheered people up. They definitely did, and the press liked writing about them. People, other people have commented on what is the significance of these two events occurring so close together. I mean, obviously it was, that's just the accidents of history, how things are, but in hindsight, we kind of look at these and say, okay, there were 79 days between the Kennedy assassination and the Beatles' debut on Ed Sullivan. So yeah, that was that period you were talking about. But they brought something back. They made people happy, and the press also had a very big role in this because they loved writing about them because they found them interesting. They found all the mania, the kids going crazy. They thought it was just kind of a fun, interesting diversion from writing about, the Warren, the assassination or wasn't the Warren Commission yet, but just it was uplifting, and young people, were just. Like we said, if you use the word smitten, I mean that's really the word, and they seemed Kennedy-like in some ways, in that they were, talked about it before, but they really were. They were charismatic. If you look at Kennedy's press conferences and the Beatles' press conferences, you can see there was a similar comfort level, they were communicators for the television age, and they would banter, and they were cool and clever citizens of the world, So they were like, and the way I describe it is the Beatles brought a new frontier.
Absolutely, yeah. And, they kind of took us on, they kind of continued that new frontier in their own way, not even meaning to.
Yes.
But
yes.
That is what occurred. And those kids the lads were just so witty, just like the president was. And, boy, we kind of missed that. And let me ask you, would you mind telling us about your Paul dream?
You really want to hear that?
Yeah, just a short little thing and your thoughts about it.
Well, this really happened. This was, some years ago. I had this dream that I got on a bus in Liverpool. And actually, no, it wasn't. I take that back. It wasn't in Liverpool. It was actually, where I grew up in Queens.
Okay.
And I get on the bus, and we get into a conversation about the Beatles and their impact during the '60s. And I make the case that the Beatles, really were big agents of change. And Paul said, "Oh, I know a lot of people say that, but it's not really true." And I said to him, "But what about that statue in Liverpool that says 4 lads who shook the world? It's really true." And he said, "Well, shook your world, maybe." And then I realized when I woke up that this notion of, it's sort of like a principle from sociology that, or just the way, societies work. In other words, there's the individual and there's the society, and there's this made up of all these individuals collectively, So if the Beatles shook my world, Candy Leonard in Queens, New York, and yours and yours and yours and yours, well, that's the world.
There you go. Absolutely.
And so they, so it was like not so necessarily one fan at a time, over time, but it was like every fan, all these young people, and not only in the U.S., but also in Europe.
Right. And Paul, I've heard him in things before. Yeah, he kind of downplays the effect of the Beatles, but I think he really knows the effect that the Beatles had on society in general, even politics, definitely in music, but even in politics and in other areas. I think he's just being a mite standoffish from that, not wanting to claim a lot of glory, but... Well,
I think it might also be overwhelmed. I mean, they never set out to do that. That's the thing. I mean, they never set out to be, leaders of the hippie movement or counterculture or idols or influence in young people. I mean, that was never really their intent. They wanted to play music, make a lot of money, meet girls. Mm-hmm. But because of when they were doing this and who they were, their chemistry between them, the nature of the music, the political moment, the cultural moment, it just happened. Half the population of the U.S. was under 25. In the 60s. And again, it's just baby boomers. It's all these kids, right? Yep. And so they had the energy of this entire generation behind them. In fact, if you look at a bar graph of the baby boom, those years, the years of the peak were between 1954 and 1958, which means the first-generation fans, the largest number of them were mere children.
Yeah.
And we forget that because we think of the screaming teenage girls, and the boys who went and started bands and all that, which, of course, those, I mean, wherever you were on that age spectrum, they affected you. But we forget that a lot of these young fans were very young children, these first-generation fans. Rather.
Yeah, definitely. Candy, if you don't mind, we need to take a very short break, about a minute long, to play a couple of public service announcements, and we'll be right back. If you can just hang with us just a moment. I got a few more good questions. I hope you don't mind standing by.
No, always happy to talk about the Beatles.
And right before you called, I played the Beatles version of the great Shirelles hit "Baby It's You," and I love the Beatles version as well. Oh, did you? That is great. Yeah, and I love the Shirelles as well. I love all the girl groups. Anywho,
as did the Beatles.
There you go. Absolutely. All righty. Here we go, and let's play these, and we'll be right back, Candy.
Okay.
All right, we are back. You still with us, Candy?
Yep.
Wonderful. I just want to get your take on this. Why, at this late stage of the game, after this many years since Beatlemania, why are Beatle fans still so passionate, not just appreciative, but passionate about the Fab Four? Why do they still have that appeal?
Well, it's, people talk about, the idea of having a favorite band, right? I mean, that doesn't begin to capture what we're looking at here. I mean, this generation we're talking about before, all these young people across this age range, right? The Beatles were a constant presence in their lives for 6 years, right?
Yeah.
And what kind of presence? They were providing this, opening our ears to this amazing music that continued to get more and more intriguing with every release. Their appearance, the ideas that they were putting forth, and the cultural obsession with them. I mean, we lived through this. They were like, one fan describes it was like having another sibling in the house. They were a presence in your life, in your house, in your family for 6 years, right? Mm-hmm. And so that doesn't go away. In other words, they really became part of who we were in the fiber of our development. So if you were 7, as I was, it was from the time I was 7 through 14. And in your case, so you were 14, so all through high school, college, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they were with you. And so that's why it was so sad for many people when they broke up. But even those that didn't freak out about them breaking up, it was like, okay, you still have that influence and that experience of them in your life. And by the way, there wasn't only a presence in your life for 6 years. They were a reliably joyful presence. Okay,
yeah.
It wasn't like somebody who it was this presence that was guaranteed always to delight
mm-hmm.
you, bring you joy, exceed your expectations. Give you stuff to talk about with your friends, give you things, words to look up in the dictionary, all kinds of things fans talked about, how they were enriched by this experience. And so that's why we can't let go of it.
That is right. Yeah, we really miss that. And you're absolutely right. I've had the same thoughts for so long, is that we just knew they were going to be there the next day and the day after. And, we were young and we were very idealistic, and some of us still are, and I attribute that to the Kennedy mystique and to the Beatles and to a sense of justice, what is right and wrong. But
well, it was a time of youth empowerment, and Kennedy embodied that, and the Beatles certainly did too. And there were so many young people at the time, and there were already seeds of youth movement planted even in the early 60s with the forming of the SDS and other student groups. So there was already some, little bits of this were happening in the culture. But when they came, and there was something so liberating about them, that they were all about youth, they were all about young people, and empowered. They themselves were so empowered, and they inspired a generation, and it really empowered people. I mean, that's the other thing. You don't forget an influence in your life. Not forgetting, others are like, why is this feeling so deep, this profound feeling? Because they gave us this feeling of empowerment.
Yeah.
And we, I mean, it was a very special time to grow up.
Isn't it just amazing? They had no intentions of any of that happening, and yet they ignited such idealism and such new thoughts and new ways of thinking, and the possibilities were endless, and the world was opened up. It was the blossoming of rock and roll too. Wow.
It was a renaissance. I really think, as I look back on it, I really think it was a renaissance, which unfortunately ended. I don't know, people can debate when it ended, with the assassination of Bobby Kennedy perhaps, or with Kent State, or with Watergate. I don't know, but it was definitely, that 79 days was like the calm, that was like the runway up to this renaissance that happened, I think, when they came, certainly a pop music renaissance without doubt. But there was also almost a kind of cultural renaissance as well.
Absolutely. Well,
that they brought along. Again, some of the seeds were already planted here and there, but they really brought it to flower because they mobilized this generation.
Absolutely right. Gosh. Well, the book is Beatleness, and it's by Candy Leonard, and it is such a wonderful book, let me tell you. But, there are so many books, maybe thousands of books about the Beatles, and why did you want to write about the Beatles? I kind of know in my own heart why you did, but do you want to explain why?
Right, you want me to answer the question, did the world really need another book about the Beatles?
Well, no. Hey, I think there will never be enough, but you tell me why you wrote this one.
They're going to keep coming, too. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, there's such an interesting, rich thing, the whole phenomenon, the music, their personal lives. I mean, there's so many ways to approach it. And if people, they inspire people to be creative. So people who study the Beatles, I think there are many, many angles that we've yet to explore. But the reason I wanted to write this was because what was missing for me was the fan's voice. The Beatles were, the fans were such a big part of the story. And there were no books that really documented this experience of growing up with them. So there's that. And also there were most of the books that were written about the Beatles, sort of full-length book treatments, were all written by men, which was ironic to me, too, because not only was the fan voice missing, but the female voice was missing. And, of course, so much of the Beatles' story, so much of the phenomenon was about the appeal to women. So it just seemed strange to me that, so those were two gaps I wanted to fill. But also this whole notion of the Beatles changed everything. People say this all the time. And, it sounds like hyperbole. Oh, the Beatles changed everything. Well, what does that really mean? So I wanted to look at that and really kind of take that on. Well, what does that mean to say? It sort of it goes back to my dream with Paul. In other words, I wanted to see if I could make the case. I didn't know. I mean, it could be just me. I don't know what these fans are going to tell me, But I did all these interviews and kind of put on my sociologist hat. Yeah. And, I felt that if we, by hearing the fans' stories and how they changed their perception of things, how they challenged the rules, how they made career choices, how they refused to get a haircut, every moment where a young person made a different decision because the Beatles were in their lives.
Yeah.
And they're not always good, by the way. I mean, a lot of people use drugs and with not so happy results in some cases. But they were a very powerful influence. But so I wanted to capture this whole change the world aspect and kind of show how really hold a magnifying glass up to it.
Is that what Beatleness means? Or all of that?
Well,
maybe?
No, Beatleness means, there was no word to describe this thing. It needed its own word. But there are three definitions of Beatleness. I'll run through them quickly. One is just that feeling of joy I was talking about before.
Sure. Right?
It's a special kind of happiness or joyfulness. It's Beatleness. It's a special thing that they elicit in you. When you hear And Your Bird Can Sing after not hearing it for 2 years.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Oh, my gosh. If you should ever be so unfortunate to have that experience.
Yeah.
So in other words, that feeling of, this is so great, or looking at a picture of them that you haven't seen, and and the same thing with when you would look at a picture gets to the second definition of Beatleness, which is their essence, their qualities. So if you watch the Grammys and you see Paul up on the stage there looking like Paul McCartney, the setting is totally different, but there's this essence of this Beatleness in him, that comes through the way he stands and holds the bass. He just he evokes Beatleness. And then the third definition is all the evidence out in the world that they've been, that they existed, So the party favors, the parodies, the newspaper and magazine headlines, the advertising, in other words, all the cultural references to the Beatles that those of us who notice these things see constantly, right? They're everywhere.
Well, do you think, say, the Beatles' influence on our generation, young people in general, in the 60s, do you think that it caused young people to oppose the war in Vietnam, or is that just...
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. But that was probably not the intention, although the Beatles were against that war.
Well, certainly by the end, John was out. He was advising protesters in Berkeley. I mean, it wasn't about the war, but it was about the use of People's Park. There was a big confrontation there, and he was advising, young people how to handle the cops and all this. So certainly, by the end, John was. It was pretty clear that he was, was more overt about influencing young people to, protest the war or whatever, but they really all along they by asking young people to question. Don't forget, it's amazing to think that all these young men who are getting drafted couldn't even vote.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, how
right.
crazy was that?
I know. Oh, that has been a question that haunted our generation back then. Yeah, you want us to die yet and to kill our fellow man, which our synagogues and churches taught us not to. And we could be killed, and you want us to kill, and yet we can't vote?
Right.
I don't think they wanted us to.
But they definitely did. I mean, I talk about this in Beatleness and how with the, so many people had, brothers in the war or cousins or kids down the street who they used to sit around and Beatle together in someone's rec room. Well, suddenly someone's drafted, and they send pictures back, and and they. It caused disturbance because young people, people started to be against the war, but some people were for the war, and so it became, it was like it broke up that old Beatle gang of mine. In other words, because there were kids who weren't even allowed to listen to the Beatles anymore because they were. For example, one of the people I interviewed grew up on a military base, and she said that, if you listened to the Beatles, that was not a good thing. A lot of parents didn't like it. Because they were afraid that they would turn their kids against the war. But when one of the turning points for this was when George Harrison showed up on the Smothers Brothers.
Oh yes,
if you remember
about that.
It was in '68.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Wow.
Yeah, that was a really significant moment because anybody who was a regular watcher of the Smothers Brothers knew what their politics was. This was when they, and in fact, when George came on, it was a cameo appearance, and he basically told the Smothers Brothers to keep on fighting for the freedom to say what they want against the CBS censors, which was, it was a big deal at the time that they were having these battles because they were quite political, quite outspoken against the war. And so when Harrison comes on and does this, it's like one fan said, I started realizing all the cool people were against the war.
Yeah.
And that kind of says it all.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Well, listen, Candy, we just have a couple of minutes left. Just one last quick question, if we could. And then we'll get back to our station identification and the other good music. And by the way, if you want to know a secret, Candy, I'm going to play Do You Want to Know a Secret at the top of the hour, right after station identification. But so I hope you keep listening on the internet, knon.org. But last little question, could anything like the Beatles happen again?
No. It's right. It is a little. It's a little question. It's a big question with a little short answer. No, but it's actually a very big question. In fact, I wrote a piece for the Huffington Post. If anybody wants to read it, they can Google, look for me at the Huffington Post, and they'll see. I wrote 6 reasons why it can never happen again, and it's partly because of many of the things we talked about. The demographics were on their side. The political moment was on their side. I mean, even the advent of transistor radio as a new communications technology for young people, was part of the picture of what made them possible. The entertainment industry was completely different. If you weren't watching the Beatles and Ed Sullivan, there were only two other options to watch. Right? Today, of course, there are thousands, and there's internet, and there's so many channels for communication now. That wasn't the case then. You had much fewer channels, and you had millions of young people globally listening to them.
Yeah.
They had the biggest communication platform. They reached more people than any communicator ever.
Wow.
So no, it can't happen again.
No, I quite agree. Sadly, for the subsequent generations, I wish. That,
I know it's really kind of sad, and it just sounds like boomer centrism to say, "Oh, how lucky we were," and all that. But it really was kind of an extraordinary thing to witness, and I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of young people who are very interested in that era, and sort of find it, because it was also, like we were saying, it was a time of great idealism, and we thought we could change the world and make it better, and we certainly need some of that attitude now. I'll tell you that.
Candy, we still can change the world. We just have to keep at it, and that's what it takes. Never giving up the fight, because I guarantee if we stop fighting, it won't stay the same. It will get worse. So, anyway, just my little thought. So, again, the book is Beatleness by Candy Leonard. It's from Arcade Press, I think.
Arcade Publishers. Yeah, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it at your local bookstore. If they don't have it, they can order it for you.
Wow.
And it's also an ebook and an audiobook.
Oh, plenty of options. Okay, how wonderful. Candy, I can't thank you enough. You've just been wonderful, and your insight just incredible, and your facts.
You so much.
I just love this so much. It's my first phone interview I've ever done. So
really,
boy, you put me at ease, and I thank you so much for that. And
you're a very good interviewer. You should do more. You're very good.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe I have a new calling. Who knows? But anyway, so thank you so much again, and feel free to call me. You have my number, and feel free to call anytime, and I'll probably send you some mail about some other thoughts that I've had about that time and about the Beatles and
okay.
Those
maybe down in the summer we're going to be looking at the 50th anniversary of Help and the Shea Stadium show. So maybe we can talk about those things.
Right, absolutely. 50th. That's right. That was 65. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And
all right. Well, thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, and you too. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Take care.
All right,
Bye.
you too. Bye. Okay. All right, folks. Time for station identification.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.